Would you impart us your insight about today's theme?
First, we have this book, which appeared in 2008, and that was the product of a conference. And you see the John Baines, John Bennett, and Stephen Houston. We are in alphabetical order there. Stephen Houston was the person who is a Mayanist. He was really the person who originated the idea. And so the question was to study not the invention of writing, but its disappearance. Why does the script cease to be used? And the cover of the book has examples of Egyptian in hieroglyphs, top left, in hieratic, beneath it, on the right, in Maya, and also pictorial materials, and then other scripts underneath. We should remember that more scripts have ceased to be used than have continued to be used. And then people now move to the modern world. In the modern world, many scripts have ceased to be used. And so we have the disappearance of hieroglyphic script as an example of how scripts can cease to be used. But people have been inventing scripts, tremendous number in the last 200 years. And the book on the right there is a first publication. Another one appeared this year, but I haven't yet been able to see it. It's called something like an atlas of endangered writing. They look at all these scripts, which are mostly produced by minority groups in the modern world. So there's an obvious, enormous difference. Egyptian and cuneiform and ancient Chinese and other scripts were all scripts of the elite, and they were not produced by marginal groups. But around Chinese in particular, you had other scripts which developed, also in Iran, next to Mesopotamia, which were the peripheral scripts, but they were still produced by elites. In the modern world, it has been different. It's been marginalized groups as a whole who are marginalized by imperialism and processes like that. So that's the type of thing we studied. So here we have just a chronology of Egypt so that you can see what periods we are talking about. The Nakada 3, the third line of the table there, is the period during which writing was introduced. That's an open question when we can talk about writing. So then I've colored that to show you first the period of greatest expansion of writing in green, the New Kingdom, and then the later periods, which lead to the disappearance. The disappearance is on the bottom, in the bottom two lines of that table. That's a map of Egypt, just to emphasize that material from Egypt comes from the Nile Valley, mainly, because the delta is too wet for things to survive, but it's where most people lived. So most material that we have comes from the Nile Valley, from Aswan. I hope people online will be able to see this near the bottom of the map. There's the line there. And then the area that has produced most writing is actually in the box there, the Fayum. But the material we'll be looking at is mainly from the Nile Valley. So here we come to the context in which the latest writing can be found. And this is the site of Philae, which is roughly at the bottom where that line was on the map, at the first cataract of the Nile. It's an island, and that is the forecourt of the temple. This was a pilgrimage site. People came there particularly from the desert and from south in Nubia, and many of them did not speak Egyptian. That forecourt dates to the reign of Augustus, to the beginning of the Roman Empire. So the Romans conquered Egypt, and then they produced this area which was for visitors. It's unusual because most Egyptian temples were not really for a public. You can see a building on a not very large building on the far left of that picture. That is the Gate of Hadrian in Philae, and you're seeing the outside of it, and the latest hieroglyphs come inside it. So here is the context. These are very, very rare images. The upper image is an image of the day and night. You have a disk, a sun disk. Underneath it is a crocodile. The crocodile is carrying a human body on its back, and that is to do with the solar cycle. You've got the sun and the moon at the top of it, and the hours of the day. And that shows that this is where the cosmos originates. On the far right, you have some rocks. Then you look at the bottom picture, and you've got more rocks there, and a cave at the bottom, which is the source of the Nile. And the figure that was a mummy on the first picture has become a bird on the other picture. That is the god Osiris. So it's celebrating the god Osiris. And this was evidently a very sacred place in late Roman times. And here you have the very latest preserved hieroglyphs, which are not beautiful. Those reliefs are also very strange in style and content, and they probably date to sometime between 1 and 200 CE. And there is the detail of that scene. And so that dates to 394 CE. The date is given you in the column of inscription below the left figure's hand. And that is in demotic, it's not in hieroglyphs. But those are the latest dated hieroglyphs there. And then on the right, you've got another figure. As you can see, all of this has been damaged, probably after conversion to Christianity. Now, in 394, the Roman Empire was basically Christian already. So this is a deeply threatened culture here. There you have a drawing of what you've just seen with, on the right, the latest example of demotic, which dates to 452. So the demotic script lasted a bit longer than hieroglyphs. And that shows you the importance of this site for the Romans, because that is a very Roman building nearby.
So the Christianization of Egypt marked a turning point.
Absolutely.
It has a lot to do with the disappearance of ancient scripts. Can you elaborate how the conversion from traditional Egyptian religion to Christianity affected the writing system and scribal culture?
It's a very long-lasting and complex process.
All right.
The Roman conquest of Egypt led to an emphasis on Greek rather than Egyptian in the culture. And the temples began to be less funded than they had been before, but not at once, over a period of about 200 years. And so the traditional cultural context was threatened by this. But temple culture continued nonetheless, and was very active in many ways. We see one or two examples. But by the 3rd century CE, the number of people who knew hieroglyphs was very small. The number who knew demotic was also small. And in the case of the site of Philae, it looks as if it was a single family continued it into the 5th century. So it's dwindling groups in different parts of the country who are maintaining it. But they were maintaining it very actively, probably into the middle of the 3rd century anyway. And so Christianity really only began to be disseminated much in the 3rd century. So traditional Egyptian culture was more affected by Greco-Roman culture than by Christianity.
Oh,
and Christianity came through Greco-Roman culture. But nonetheless, once it had come, the Egyptians saw Christianity as being theirs. And so they then adopted Greek script, adapted it to Egyptian, and then you had a kind of national revival in Coptic, as it is, the Coptic script, which is derived from Greek. I thought we would go backwards in a sense and look at the latest manifestations of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This takes us over hundreds of years. You have there a beautiful stela, which is of the 1st century or maybe 2nd century BCE, which comes from the cult of the sacred bull which is somewhere near Luxor, Armant. And that shows a Ptolemaic king, and the hieroglyphs are very elaborate and beautiful. And obviously that stela, it's the figure of the bull, it actually has gold on it. It's a very high prestige object. If we look at the next picture, these are the latest dated separate objects in hieroglyphs. Now, on the left, you have something that dates to the Tetrarchs, the 4 Roman emperors who ruled at the end of the 3rd and the beginning of the 4th century. And then the right-hand one is the latest dated separate inscription in Egyptian dating to 340. Now, there's an important difference between the two of those. The left one has a figure of the king, the right doesn't. But you can still read those hieroglyphs, and it dates to 340. But the dating is not an ancient Egyptian dating. It's a dating by the era of Diocletian, and Diocletian is the leading member of the 4 on the left. So in this animal cult, in a remote provincial area, hieroglyphs survived better than anywhere else that we know. But remember, there's a lot we don't know.
Interesting.
What I want to do here is to show you the way in which these developments are the long-term result of much earlier things. There you have a much, much earlier temple relief, early 13th century BCE, which has a very elaborate inscription above the figure of the king there. Up till that point, these inscriptions have been very simple. So this is the beginning of a development which led to a much greater elaboration of hieroglyphs. Also, left picture, comment here is just on how weird the figure of the god is there. That's a figure of the god Osiris. And so there's a big diversification of what you get in temples. And in the long run, it wasn't possible to contain that within everyday writing. You skip 500 years, 600 years, and you have that stela there, which it comes from a period of revival when people tried to go back to earlier forms, and earlier hieroglyphs were written in vertical columns like that. And so that's a revival of the style of more than 1,000 years earlier. So people are constantly referring back to the distant past. And that is another example of the same phenomenon with a statue, which is a little bit earlier still.
In this era, the king was not native Egyptian. They were Libyans.
Well, yes, I'm not sure how important that is, I have to say.
I mean,
perhaps I'm in a minority here.
if they try to go back and revive the old tradition of writing, I think that has to do with their weak kind of foundation of authority or kingship.
I think that is true, but I suspect that these people, so if we, stela, you're talking, that one on the left, Psammetichus, this king had a name that doesn't look like Egyptian. And he descends from groups of people who were ethnic Libyans. But in a way, I think that's a bit like Donald Trump, let's say. So Donald Trump's grandfather was called Drumpf and was German. And so similarly, Psammetichus was from an ethnically immigrant family, but they had probably lived in Egypt for centuries. So, I think so foreigners were important in another way, that the previous ruling group were people from Sudan. And when they drove them out, they asserted their Egyptian credentials. But I think they probably were okay with their credentials.